The idea is simple, but it's way easier said than done. Sell when everybody is hyped about an asset and buy when everybody is fearful. Now what we see here in this chart, that's the perpetual market directional premium. So the short-term traders that are betting on Bitcoin, they might have very high financing costs. It costs a lot to bet on rising prices of Bitcoin, or they might even have negative financing costs. They get money to bet on falling prices. When this is high, everybody is bullish. When this is low, the majority of short-term traders are bearish. And currently we are exactly at those low levels. Doesn't it make sense to buy this dip now? Unfortunately, the situation isn't always that clear. For example, have a look at this. This is the total supply that's currently in loss, measured in BTC. This tends to peak when we are at the end of a bear market, and it tends to bottom when we are at least at local bottoms in the Bitcoin price. Currently, we are rather high, and we might potentially go down. But have a look at what happened in the middle of the year 2022. Yes, medium term, the metric did go down, and we did eventually recover, but we did have another sell-off here. Bitcoin was a bit under 30K and went all the way to 16K. That's an almost 50% drop from here. So sometimes I get those comments on this channel. Yesterday you've been extremely bullish about Bitcoin or Ethereum. Today you're very bearish. What's going on here? I think very often the misunderstanding just comes from time horizons. I am still very much bearish on the macro. I do think that we're going to fall further. I don't think that we are at the bottom of the bear market, but every now and then we do get our relief rallies. And of course it does make sense to sometimes time those as well. But this is more of a macro video. Have a look at the realized loss. And that's the ratio of long-term holders to short-term holders, a 30-day moving average of that ratio. In 2022, there were two waves of selling. One bringing us close to the 30K mark, another one bringing us closer to the 16K mark. We again see how losses are getting realized, but we are not yet at the final capitulation. There is a chance we see another wave of selling. That's at least my base case scenario. And so again, it's just about the time horizon that we talk about. If we just talk about the next week or two, we might get a relief rally because the long-term holders are currently accumulating. Have a look at how this is fluctuating. When the long-term holders buy, we tend to see a bit of a rally. When they sell, we tend to see that rally slow down and turn around, but this is hovering around the zero line and changing directions every few weeks. The long-term holders are currently buying at a quicker pace, but still, just because Bitcoin might move to 70 or 75K, and just because short-term we might be oversold, it doesn't necessarily change the macro picture. Over here, we've got the net unrealized profit and loss, and I almost show this chart now in every single macro video on this channel. In the past, we always fell into net unrealized losses. The average Bitcoin investor used to be in the negatives, used to see red in their portfolio before we finally saw the turnaround. Currently, the average Bitcoin investor is still 18% in profit. Again, the long-term holders tend to rather accumulate now. And the dormant Bitcoin is not getting moved. But even during periods like this, we can still see the price fall from 30K to 16K. Very little dormant Bitcoin reactivation. The value days destroyed metric was very low. Still, spillover effects from traditional finance and current momentum can lead to further declining prices, even if current valuations aren't necessarily particularly high. When the market is hot, when prices tend to rise, we also tend to see more short-term trading activity. As in, when we compare the wallets that trade Bitcoin within 1 or 2 weeks, and we compare that activity of those wallets to the wallets that trade Bitcoin maybe only once every year or every 2 years, when we look at that ratio, we tend to see that when prices rise, when the market gets more active, that the short-term holders, they become relatively more active. That's what we see in the realized HODL ratio. When this is high, the market is hot. When this is low, the long-term holders trade comparatively more. And since Bitcoin hit roughly 100K, we see the trading activity slowing down. We see how the market continues to cool. And again, we tended to be in the green area at the bottom of prior bear markets. We still continue to slow down in activity. The market continues to cool. The MVRV Z-score is also not yet in the green. In other words, we are not yet below the realized price. The main reason why I think the MVRV score matters so much is because it shows us how there are diminishing returns from cycle to cycle. So it becomes less and less profitable to take the bottom, to buy low. When the reward, relatively speaking, declines, we need to be more and more certain that we're actually picking up prices that are low enough. Simply because the upside becomes less, our downside also needs to be very, very low. The risk to reward calculation still needs to make sense. Getting less reward but keeping the same risk level is not a good idea. We want to be cautious with our entry points. And it appears as if the market is becoming smarter. It starts to understand this. With the prior cycle, we have seen that the number of wallets that hold at least one Bitcoin tended to go up during a bear market. So people tend to buy Bitcoin when Bitcoin actually retraces, when it goes down. They tend to just hold their Bitcoin when Bitcoin goes up. So really the growth phases, when the number of investors is going up for Bitcoin, they're really during a bear market. This is when people buy in. Have a look at this. This is the number of addresses with at least one Bitcoin, and it's not going up anymore for the last 2 to 3 years. One of the reasons for that decline might be the launch of the ETFs, but have a look at when this grew the last time, when we went from 0.8 million to 1 million. That happened when Bitcoin crashed from 67K to 15K. The real growth happens through volatility. It happens through crashes. We have to come down more in order to instill more growth. Currently, we simply stopped the decline. We're just going sideways. But as Bitcoin drops more, as the price falls more, this might finally turn around and people might buy Bitcoin when it's cheap enough, when the risk to reward is worth it, when the market has already cooled sufficiently, and when the average investor is in unrealized losses. Have a look at this. This is a Bitcoin long-term chart. It's on a logarithmic scale. Here's the same on a linear scale, but the logarithmic scale tells us about percentage changes. The white line, that's just a curved line. There's nothing mathematical about it, but it does connect the price bottoms quite well. And so it gives us an idea of how much risk there currently is in the market. Short term, we are in a consolidation phase. There is the potential for Bitcoin to go up to roughly 78K or so. But there's also the risk, if the market continues its bearishness, to drop all the way below 40K. Now, I'm not waiting for that price level. I think the 50K mark is already a good entry point. Still, currently, the risk versus short-term reward isn't that great. Now the 78, 79K mark is interesting because it also aligns with a backtest. So here's Bitcoin Strategy Analytics. It's the backtesting platform available to all the premium members of this channel. And I've backtested various moving averages for Bitcoin. Following that strategy outperforms buying and holding quite a bit. Here's the value in BTC. At the top is the value in US dollars. And here are the numbers. If you bought and held Bitcoin over the backtested period, you would have gotten 22%, but using that strategy, the portfolio more than doubles every year. It's trading two moving averages, the 2-day with the 116-day simple moving average, and interestingly enough, the 116-day simple moving average is currently at 78K. So this very much aligns with our medium-term consolidation range. If we break out of that range, then maybe the reward is much higher. But if we don't, if that stays the resistance, then the bear market will likely continue. And again, that's my base case. I do think that the bear market continues from here, that we see another wave of selling. But short term, we might be oversold. There is some accumulation and we do have a nice support line. And the perpetual futures traders are also very bearish, which tended to be a quite reliable local bottom indicator. Now we are trading based on this backtest already since October of last year. And so there's a copy trading vault available to the premium members. It so far made $722,000. There's actually more than one automatic copy trading vault. So there's Bitcoin, there's Ethereum, there's Solana. There's also a relative valuation altcoin trading vault. You can either automatically copy trade or you can just manually execute the trades. There are signals in Telegram, and now just launched this week, there will also be email notifications with the respective chart attached. I hope I was able to clarify my thoughts here, right? When I make a title that says Bitcoin is very cheap now, and next video I make a title Bitcoin is super expensive, that's not because I fundamentally changed my approach to Bitcoin. It's just because it's a different time horizon that I'm talking about. It's also the reason why I explain my reasoning in all of those videos. The short-term thesis can be very different to the longer-term thesis. But if you can follow my reasoning in those videos, you'll understand why I flip-flop in some of those titles. It's simply because the short term might have changed, but the long term hasn't changed. I'm still bearish, and the icon here of this channel, right, it's still a bear. I will switch this to bull once I'm bullish again. Thanks for watching. If you got some value, feel free to give it a like. It will help the channel grow. Feel free to also subscribe. I publish videos regularly. See you next time on YouTube, or potentially also in Premium. A link to Premium pops up here on the screen. See you next time. Bye-bye.